Welcome back to the Space Salvi Institute podcast. I'm Andrew Petiprin.
And I'm Bobby Mixa.
And today we are talking about the encyclical letter of Pope Leo XIV, his first as pontiff. We've been looking forward to it, and it's called Magnifica Humanitas on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. Now, that subtitle, uh, I have to admit, when I first saw it, I thought to myself a few years ago that would have seemed like science fiction, that the Pope is writing something and sending it out to the world, and the topic is about um, trying to maintain humanity in the face of artificial intelligence. But here we are, and maybe the first thing to say about this encyclical Magnifica Humanitas is just to say it's significant that the Pope is saying something about the phenomenon we are all living through right now, which is certainly nothing short of a revolution, akin to the Industrial Revolution that Pope Leo XIII was responding to at the end of the 19th century. So we'll see today in our conversation. We don't claim to be know-it-alls. We're not trying to be pundits. We don't have any hot takes. I don't know about you, Bobby, but I have consciously avoided all the takes.
Hmm.
And part of this has to do with the fact that I haven't been on Twitter much lately at all. I've just been focused on my own fiction writing. Maybe I'll say a little more about that later.
Yeah, yeah.
But I've just avoided it. I've not been interested in anybody's opinions about Magnifica Humanitas. And so my opinions that I have to share today are really just based on looking at the text and just things that happen to be in my mind. So let me throw it to you and see what you think, like just to kind of give our listeners and viewers an idea of the kind of conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, well, I'm not as good as you, Andrew. I've actually been looking at some of the takes, and some of them that came out right away are overviews of the text, but some of them are a little bit more insightful than others. So yeah, I mean it's a long encyclical, almost as
They're getting
long as
longer, aren't they? I mean, Pope Francis's
Yeah.
were long, Pope Benedict's were long. They're long these days.
Yeah, exactly. And so it took some time to get through it. So that's why I was a little bit skeptical of anyone who was coming out with their hot take based on, within hours of its release, unless they had, an advanced copy, about actually really reading it, dwelling with the text and letting it kind of like seep in and contemplate what it says, just as, it almost seems like the hot take is a symptom, is the very thing that Pope Leo is trying to address with the kind of superficiality of our age. So I'm a little bit happy that we're addressing this like more than 2 weeks after its release. But I'm surprised but not surprised that the Pope is writing on artificial intelligence. It seems like I've kind of been waiting for some statement about some of these new things from the Pope, and more or less, they're addressing it every now and then. And Pope Leo definitely, hinted at this that he was going to address these new things by taking on the name Leo. Um, but every now and then, I've always been a little bit let down by some of the statements of popes when they talk about communication technologies and all of that. And we'll get into this maybe a little bit later, but usually you just hear something along the lines of well, the technology is neutral. What matters is how we use it. And so it's all
Hmm.
about kind of human intentionality without maybe thinking about the intentionality that structures the whole thing and then
Right.
reiterates that intentionality without us actually intending it anymore. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that he's addressing this. Um, and I think I've gone through some of the different commentaries, and I think there's room for some criticism, but overall, I have to be honest. I recently finished reading the encyclical, but the way he ends it, the conclusion I absolutely love. So
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I like the ending a lot too. And I well, let's get into this. I, I,
yeah,
I feel I feel I'm of two minds about this encyclical, but I thought maybe we could start with maybe I'll start first and then
yeah,
throw
yeah.
it to you. Um, just flagging various things that we really like about it.
Hmm.
And maybe before I do that, I would just say this, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I noticed that there is no recipient addressed at the beginning of this encyclical
Hmm.
at all. And so I looked back and I looked at Spe Salvi, which is obviously a very important encyclical for us. And Pope Benedict addresses that one he says, to the bishops, priests, and deacons, men and women religious, and all the lay faithful on Christian hope. So that is obviously a document that is addressed to the people of God, to the church, right? To Christian people everywhere. But he sort of works down the hierarchy, right? To sort of, name what kind of give the world an idea of kind of what the body of Christ looks like in its constitutive parts.
Mhm.
But then I looked at Rerum Novarum, just as I looked at that one because I thought it was as good as any, a kind of an example of a modern encyclical, but still quite an old one now at this point, but also one that's significant because it's it's obviously like sort of in the mind of Pope Leo XIV as he's writing his first encyclical. And Rerum Novarum, I'll just read it. It says, "To our venerable brethren, the patriarchs, primates, archbishops, bishops, and other ordinaries of places having peace and communion with the apostolic see." So that encyclical, which obviously has had quite a life in terms of like, in a sense, like creating this Catholic social doctrine and or sort of describing it in such a way that it kind of takes on a life in the 20th century, right? But actually, it is addressed to the leaders of the church. It is addressed to his brother bishops who have
Hmm.
jurisdiction in teaching the faithful. So I just wanted to name that as something interesting from the
I
start
didn't
that
catch that. That's interesting.
that not only there's a kind of difference maybe in emphasis when you are addressing a particular audience, uh, I guess that is kind of the point that I wanted to make because my one thing that I will say about Magnifica Humanitas is it does read to me kind of like the church talking to the world. I mean, it's not to say that like the faithful aren't identifying in it like the voice of their pastor speaking to them. I think that we do feel that way. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I think it's very much in line with this idea of kind of dialogue that Pope Leo brings up in the document and that obviously Pope Leo talked or that Pope Francis talked about a lot as well. That it
Hmm.
really is, and I think he sort of makes the point by spending so much time at the beginning of the encyclical basically describing what Catholic social doctrine is or Catholic social teaching
Yeah, and
is.
it's an overview of a whole quite
Right. I
extensive
mean,
overview of its teaching, and it's pretty good too. I mean, it
yeah.
was nice to really like see a definition of subsidiarity and solidarity. Um,
Yeah, and to kind of have in the span of several paragraphs, like, oh, that document, that, to sort of know, like, this is where you go if you kind of want to get an idea of
yeah,
it, right? But it does kind of read like, obviously there are lots and lots of people in the church today who have no idea what Catholic social teaching is. So, of course, we all could use a primer like that.
yeah,
But like I said before, it does kind of read more like it's to the world, sort of saying to the world, hey, world, this is the way, like, I represent the Catholic Church, right? And
yeah,
here's the way we're supposed to think about all this stuff. But I need to give you this framework first so that you kind of understand how we arrive at a place in the year 2026 where a guy in white clothing like me, who mostly, talks about God and stuff, is purporting to talk about computers and robots and stuff like that, right?
yeah.
So I think that it's successful. I think that the encyclical is successful in that way.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe I'll stop there. There's one other kind of success I wanted to point to before
Yeah,
maybe
point
we.
it out now.
Okay, well the other thing then that I wanted to point to was I think that the from a pastoral perspective then, whether he's talking to the whole world or just talking to the faithful, I think that the framework he sets up of the kind of the two biblical stories, the kind of the two cities, the Tower of Babel and the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe we'll get into the details of
yeah,
that, but like I think that's quite a nice image to put in our minds.
absolutely.
Now,
Yeah,
I think the weakness of it, and let's get into this more, the weakness of it is again then just to default to think, okay, there's always, no matter what we're talking about, there's always two paths in front of us, right? You either do it the prideful way or you do it in the way where you're cooperating with God, and we've got to pick the way we're cooperating with God, right? But
yeah,
I do think with regard to some of these technological things, it's more complicated than that. And I think some of that stuff isn't really addressed in this encyclical. But I do think like big picture, you're talking to people who are like, obviously they're not going to be able to receive the idea that like I mean, you're not going to get anywhere with anybody if your message is like, "Hey, let's tear the whole thing down."
Yeah.
I mean, and so clearly the Pope wasn't going to do that. And so instead he gives us these two biblical images that I think are really quite useful for attaching the ideas of what human kind of work and industry and stuff is good for.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's run with that a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
because I'll talk about some of the commentary. There was one between Father Mike Schmitz and what's his name? Arthur Brooks. Um, and Arthur Brooks mentioned that this is like these technologies and going back to Rerum Novarum and then up to today, there's nothing new under the sun. I get what he's trying to say. There's nothing new under the sun. We're human beings. We all, experience envy. We experience these different temptations going all the way back. But I do think that there is, when we talk about new things, there is something quite novel, specifically about AI. And when we talk about it too as a kind of tool, I think this is kind of, I think we have to do a better job at addressing what do we mean by tool, like a gadget. And I think actually one of the best commentaries that I've seen on this so far, is actually by a guy named actually Anton Barbara K. Anton Barbara K. Actually, some of our viewers probably have heard, me mention him before, or maybe Larry Chapp. I know has read his book called the. I've read sections of the book called The Web of Our Own Making, and he's quite a pessimist about the world that we're in, but I do think it's one of the more perceptive books on like what is the actual digital age or the age of AI that we're in, and how this is actually quite novel and different from technologies before, and how it's shaping us in so many ways that we don't even realize. I encourage everybody to go take a look at this commentary. It's called "Should the Lion Lie Down with the Lamb with the Electric Lamb? For all its strength, Leo's." Yeah. So, anyways, it's on Hedgehog Review by Antone Barbara K. Um, and in that, he kind of takes up this question too about whether one of the issues is, even though you address, what's called the technological paradigm, which, in Laudato Si, Pope Francis kept, he talks about, and it's very helpful. But oftentimes, what he's saying is that um, like we're actually falling even in the way that we're talking about the technological paradigm, we're falling within the technological paradigm, if that makes any sense. Um, and so even though you call technology is like, well, technology is never neutral, yes. But yet, in some ways, you go on then next to say further as if it is kind of neutral, and we just need somebody to kind of like, oversee it. I really am kind of interested in like so you mentioned these two ways. Are we going to either build are we going to go the way of Babel, or are we going to go the way of like rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, like what Nehemiah does? Okay. And I think that there's building. I'm really happy that he's bringing up this language of building, and he talks about
Hmm.
construction sites of hope. Um,
Yeah.
that I like that language, the construction site of hope, building kind of in hope. It made me think too, and just I know I'm kind of maybe going over all over the place right now, but there was a book I read last year, um, and he talks about it's all about building, 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 and the guy who wrote it with another, it kind of annoys me. The CEO of Palantir, Alexander Karp. The book is called A Technological Republic: Hard Power, Soft Belief in the Future of the West. And the book is like I don't know, it's like all these kind of, all these different essays somehow connected, but they're all kind of about building the future. And the critique is that we've been building all these kind of social media platforms that have actually really, in the long run, haven't done us much good. But let's build in another way. But it's all for the sake of making the state kind of more powerful in an aggressive way. Um,
Hmm.
So I think that like attending to this language of building is really, really important. And I'm happy to see Pope Leo address that. But I think that like a little deeper analysis of this stuff is a little bit called for. I mean, I'll just bring this up. Maybe oftentimes when we were nothing kind of ticked me off more than I don't know, something that really, really, really drove me nuts when I was working at Word on Fire was sometimes when we would talk about the digital media and okay, this is just a tool. It's got its
Hmm.
problems, right? Cancel culture, etc.
Yeah.
But then it would be Saint Augustine would give his right arm to use these things.
Yeah, they're the Roman roads.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Roman and spread exactly to spread the in service of the gospel. And Pope Leo kind of brings this up at the end too. He talks about like digital evangelists and all that stuff.
Hmm.
But I just have to be honest with you. When I meet a digital evangelist, oftentimes they're on their phone or hoping that the conversation is gonna like go a little faster so they could get back on that phone or take a photo if I'm important
Yeah.
to then post on the digital platform. And so
Yeah.
like what I'm concerned about is that oftentimes the real world is that world. It's not the real world. So like what
Yeah.
I've always been concerned about is like okay, what first of all is reality? What are we being drawn to? Like in service of what? How is this actually is this medium shaping the way that we're actually presenting it? Is it just the content that we're presenting? And Anton Barbara K gets at this in his article. Or is there a formal component to it? I mean,
Hmm.
the way he ends this article is he says, um, and the church has not yet recognized heresies of form. He talks about this formal way. It's not just the content. Um, and I think that is incredibly right to be attentive to, well, hey, if I put my text up on, say, a website, is is that necessarily the same? Is that just another, like writing something on I don't know, on some stone tablet? Is it the same thing? Um, anyways, I'm kind of going off on.
Yeah. No, I think you've already flagged some of the things that are kind of I hesitate to say that they're missing from this encyclical because again, I just really think the intention of this uh
Yeah, I
was
don't want to
not
sound
was
like
not really to grapple with some of these very questions. And like I said, I'm really of two minds about this because I think on
yeah,
the one hand, I think undeniably, like a cursory exploration of this document by a secular person or a Catholic or whoever, they would come away with the idea, the kind of big picture idea that we keep hearing about. Precisely what you just said. Basically, look, guys, when it comes to tools, it's all about how we use them. You know,
yeah.
okay, fine. But, we've had a couple of great conversations with Michael Hanby on this podcast. We've talked to Charlie Camosi. We've talked to other people in the Catholic world who are really and the author that you talk about from that Hedgehog Review article, which I only had a chance to kind of glance at. You sent it to me earlier today, but who are really naming some of these problems that are lurking beneath uh, all of this use language, all of this sort of tool language, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Because precisely as you say, like there's an effect back on us with regard to the technology that we have invented
Yeah.
that it really is more powerful. It exerts a more powerful influence upon us than just reliance upon a tool. Um, and there was another point that I was going to make about that, but do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean
I
it's
forgot.
yeah, we make the tool, but then the tool makes us.
Right.
And I mean that's not taking away our, like agency at all, but yet the agency is in some ways conditioned by that thing.
Yeah.
And so I mean this is um think about the world that is created through the various technologies. I mean, just like simply the car. It's not just like to get from point A to point B. I mean, it fundamentally changes the world. I mean,
Yeah.
like Anton Kay talks about in some of his other lectures about the difference between an interstate highway and a path. Okay. I mean, the interstate highway, I mean, is really efficient and like effective at getting you from point A to point B, but it transforms the landscape. You have a different sense of time, of space. You have a different sense of like you see how nations change after that. A path also is kind of winding road, and if a path isn't used, by it's there because it's used by people. Then if it's not used for a little bit of time, it ends up actually not being really a path. There's overgrowth on it. Um, but I just think that there just has to be a little bit when we're engaging some of these things, a little bit more reflection. And this is, yeah, I get it that the Pope is not setting out to do that. But I think
Right.
that there really should be a lot of reflection on these things. And I'm not saying that like obviously we're using I think that actually having a podcast and Zoom thing is great, even though this thing is recording us right now, and it's a little bit odd because, once we turn this thing off, all of a sudden, our conversations feel a little bit more at ease, and I like, but now we're being
Yeah.
recorded, and this is actually precisely for the sake of putting it out there.
Right.
And that's the intention. And that's always in mind. It's not just a conversation, but
Right.
it's close. And
Yeah.
I think that like I don't know. I've been always drawn to that kind of formal part. And I think there really I think when he says there's heresies of form, I think there's something right. And I think at the very end of this encyclical, when he gets into the conclusion and he talks about Eucharist, and the sacramental, the sacrament of the Eucharist. I think that is the kind of way we should be thinking about technology, precisely in the sense of like how we think about presence,
Hmm.
and communion. So we got communication technologies, but he says, and Pope Leo, I think, says we have a different model of communion.
Right.
Um,
Right, and he gets into this in the two cities model where with
yeah.
Nehemiah. I mean, he points to the fact that Babel was ultimately it was a kind of hubristic attempt at unity in the
Hmm.
face of God that ultimately resulted in fragmentation, dispersal, and lack of connection. Whereas rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem was something that fostered communion, right?
Yeah.
And I do think it's significant here, and maybe I just haven't read the document well enough yet, but it is, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned before the kind of digital evangelist thing and like all that kind of thing. I didn't get any of that from this encyclical. I didn't get a lot,
Yeah.
if any of this idea of like, hey, Catholics, um, embrace this stuff. Go use it. Go do it. In fact, I
Hmm.
kind of I kind of think like if you had to pick which side, like whether it was sort of pro or con, like whether you should use these things even for noble purposes. It seemed to me like the balance was a little bit in the direction of maybe you probably shouldn't. And I think that it's significant that, as you say, it ends with the Eucharist because the one thing that I've said for a long time that I'm getting a little bit from this document is that Catholics ought to say over and over again is you cannot be a virtual Catholic. Like you could be the most sort of shallow influencer type in the whole world and purport to be a Catholic who wants people to become Catholic. But at the end of the day, you still can't do that just with your phone.
Yeah.
Like you have to put your phone down and show up in person with other people and take a little piece of bread into your body,
Hmm.
right? I mean, and so I think that is something that is really can you think of anything else in the world like that where it's like to sort of fully belong, I mean, maybe some types of work, I suppose, and that's kind of part of the debate right now. Like there's certain types of work that could never be done, or at least I can't imagine yet, could be done by a robot or just by pressing a button on a computer or something. But maybe that's wrong. Um, and maybe those are the things we just need to kind of focus on. The last thing I'll say, kind of to sum up these kinds of points, is uh, I say this both feeling a little bit relieved and also a little bit sad, which is the thing that I think comes through in this encyclical is that AI is not going to go away.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what's the point in the church condemning it? You know? And it's not going to go away. Like for example, when Pope Paul VI said Catholics couldn't use contraception, for example. I mean, I think there was still a kind of one-to-one correspondence where it was like, well, you either use this thing or you don't.
Yeah.
And so it was still okay. It was still conceivable, I guess, pardon the pun, for the church to say, like, this thing exists and we can't use it. Sorry. We're going to be the people who don't participate in that.
Yeah.
But AI is not, it's not like that. And
Yeah.
it's a precisely what you said before. It's a new thing of a whole different nature.
Yeah. I mean,
And like I said, that kind of makes me feel sad because it really is like we're just kind of at the coping stage now. Like, okay,
yeah.
how can we be, how despite this can we maintain the highest degree of humanity that we can,
Yeah.
right?
The Matthew Walter, the editor of the Lamp, had an
Yeah.
article kind of along those lines, and somebody responded to him saying, "Yeah, well, the Pope clearly wasn't going to condemn it, but I mean, at least in the context of education, I'll tell you that it's like." I mean, maybe some of our viewers should know this. I'm like in the next 3 weeks, I won't be teaching anymore, and there's all these reasons why. But one of the things that's so frustrating in education these days, unless you have the student write things out in front of you with, just on a notepad. Um, I mean, a notepad, I mean like pen and paper. Um, you're never sure that it's genuinely their work. And the frustration of that's caused, but also the de-skilling. I mean, it's like, it's hard enough to write a good essay. I mean, I'm always tempted to double check and say, wait a minute, is it the grammar? Am I, I don't have an editor on hand all the time, but is my grammar correct right here? And I'll just double check. But then it becomes like a little bit of a habit. Well, heck, like if I have this on hand, what's the harm of constantly making it remake a sentence or something like that? And so, I mean, but then you become, if you're doing that at a young age, and I'm like, okay, I'm almost 40 years old. Um, and I've had enough education and experience to, actually figure out what is actually like, complete sentence. But a lot of students, they'll just continually to rely on this stuff and they'll never learn. So what's interesting is like, and I think some people have pointed this out, how can we actually monitor this if our capacity to actually judge and have that skilled judgment to monitor
Mhm.
things well is just gone because we've been using it from day one. Um,
Right. Yeah, and it
so
seems like what we're saying is we're just going to be okay with that. Like it is
yeah,
what it is, and so we just have to adapt to that. I mean, I've yet to. I'm sorry I cut you off, but let me just
no, no,
interject this
yeah,
really quick. Like, I mean, I've been looking, admittedly not very hard, because honestly, a lot of this frustrates me so much that I am just increasingly retreating, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy with that, but. At the same time, I mean, I have looked a bit to see if there was any really astute um, kind of observer who could make a case for me that there are ways to control this. That you don't need to buy the narrative which says that there's nothing we can do about it, and so on. And I have not really found one. I mean, I really think that there's just a general consensus that we've created this thing and we really don't know what it's going to do to us, but we can't kill it. It's here. Even though, funnily enough, there does seem to be a kind of instinct, a kind of negative instinct about it in some circles. Did you see there were a couple of college graduations this season
yeah.
where speakers, I think one
Eric
was at the
Schmidt
University
or
of
what's his
Central
name?
Florida. Yeah, where was that one? That was
The
at
former Google CEO.
and he got booed when
He
he
got
sort of
booed.
talked
Yeah.
about,
What was the
yeah, and there
Central
was another
Florida
one.
one?
It
I
was
didn't
some
hear.
woman, I forget, it was a woman speaker. I forget what she was, but she got booed as well when she sort of talked about the AI revolution. And now, I mean, I think like on the one hand, that's probably in part a reaction to young people going out into a job market that they're now being told, you know,
Yeah.
basically these things people told you you should major in because there's a future in them. There absolutely is not. I mean, don't you remember a few years ago they were telling everybody learn to code? That
Yeah.
was like the buzz phrase. Now it's like, totally irrelevant. Like they're saying exactly the opposite. So I do think that there's probably this practical side, and Pope Leo does allude to that a little bit
Yeah.
in the encyclical, right? But I hope that it was more than that. I hope that their reaction was more like, no, darn it, we want to be human beings. And we know that this is dehumanizing us.
Well, I think that there is kind of a little bit of that reaction amongst young students. I mean, talking to some of my students, even though they're using this stuff, they 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 really don't like it. I mean, you have some students buying, like I remember a couple of them, they buy things in vinyl, and I asked them, "Why are you buying it in vinyl?" And they like actually because it's like it's actually there. I mean, if
Yeah,
you
there
take
is a
out,
kind of analog and a kind of analog rebellion.
yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, I think that's good. I mean, we'll see
We'll
what that
see.
means.
But
Yeah.
then usually what comes up is like, hey, well, we can use this for, health purposes and all the data and all these other kind of, glorious things that it could be put to use for. Let's get into too, like, in the encyclical, there's actually, I've heard a bunch of people kind of talking about this, so I apologize if people have already heard some commentary on the paragraph 99. It's in the section when he does talk about AI, but paragraph 99 is when he kind of he defines it and talks about intelligence. Um, I don't, Andrew, is it okay if we jump there?
Yeah, please. Yeah,
Okay. I
go
think
go
like,
there.
yeah, I mean, I think what's important here is, he talks about the misconception of equating um, the intelligence that we use for artificial intelligence with that of the intelligence of human beings. And then when he talks about human intelligence, um, you know, he doesn't just talk about it in terms of computation. He doesn't talk about it just in terms of speed, um, but and data processing, etc. But he talks about it as like possessing a body, like feeling pain, joy, going through maturity of relation of you're going to see relationship is at the heart of this kind of anthropology, Christian anthropology that he's trying to kind of flesh out. I really see, I mean, it's obviously the name of the encyclical is hinting at this, but it's like kind of a like what we're about, like Christian humanism and retrieving a proper understanding of Christian anthropology. But like it brought to mind this paragraph, something DC Schindler always said about some reviewers probably maybe heard DC Schindler even say this on the podcast that I'm not going to trust AI unless I can change its diaper or something like that.
Mhm.
It doesn't have a body. And somebody who's like really perceptive on this connection between embodied or just let's just talk about embodied intelligence, is somebody like Matthew Crawford. And
Mhm.
I think that like what's AI, the one good thing that AI maybe is kind of forcing us to do is really to ask that question again, is like, what are we as human beings?
Mhm.
Heidegger in his famous Der Spiegel interview in like the 1960s after, this is after Sputnik and all that, and they're talking about the space age and also putting up atomic bombs up into space. He talks though, like he talk he I think he is quoting Hulderin. Maybe I'm mispronouncing that romantic poet's name, but
Yeah.
it kind of like in the moment of like dark, and I'm probably misquoting this too, but in the moment of this kind of absolute darkness, it's like there is this, so the crisis is actually something where you can the thing itself kind of shows itself that
Yeah. Right.
it's like hope kind of like manifests itself at that moment. I mean, Heidegger, I don't think would use the term hope. Um, but it's like I think what this is forcing us to do is to really consider what does it mean to be a human being? What is human intelligence? And
Yeah.
like what is the nature of our of us being tool makers and our relationship with the tools that we make? Um,
Hmm.
and so, anyways, but this embodied thing I think is really important, and we just so
Yeah.
often forget that stuff. So, I think like if anything, you often there's a really good book on artificial intelligence that's maybe a little dated now, but it's oh gosh, what's his name? He taught at University of Chicago, died young, wrote a whole book on Heidegger's Dasein. Ah, his name is escaping me, but I'll maybe I'll put this in the comments later. But he has a book just I think on just called On Artificial Intelligence, and it's a philosophy of that. And he talks about good old-fashioned artificial intelligence, but it's like really the computation, equating intelligence with computation is very much a modern thing. And he talks about its roots, I don't want to go back over this in like early modernity. Um, but I think what's happening is once we have this, now I think what we can do is see the mistaken, like see that as actually a mistaken path. And it will, I think, plant seeds of hope and maybe stir a rebellion.
Mm-hmm. I wonder. I hope so. Yeah, I think that's
Or
really
perhaps we're
insightful.
just, I don't know, kind of screwed, like Anton Barbara Kay says, and we're just trapped in this web of our own.
Well, I mean, something that the Pope doesn't say exactly is that, I mean, when you misapply your talent, you it will kill you, right? I mean, like the Tower of Babel ends badly, right? Like it's not a story of like, well, what they did, God didn't like it, but it just, it kept going,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, I do kind of think that there's still this, yeah, there is this idea that like it is hel it at the very least it's helpful to hear the Pope remind us of different paths, a different path because or all the stuff you just outlined about, the possibility of some kind of like hope that will present itself sort of coming out of the dark or whatever. Because um if like it, I mean, obviously like this has been taken up in sci-fi in the Terminator and in, and stuff like that, but like some of us can imagine that this will all end horribly. Like it's not going to lead to our progress and our happiness. It's going to lead to our misery. And the sooner we realize that and try and course correct at least a bit, the better. I just, I don't want to dwell in that for too long because I try not to go there too much in my mind. But I mean, that's potentially there. And maybe that's a good segue to something else I wanted to talk about. And maybe if there's stuff that you want to pick up from what you're saying before, please do. But I wanted to be sure that we got to a few passages in here. I really didn't know what to think of them, and I wonder what you think of them. Where it starts around paragraph 108, where he starts talking about kind of the people, logically, he's talking about like the people who possess, economic resources, expertise, and access to data, right? That's kind of the whole technocratic paradigm thing, that there's this sort of expert class who are the only ones who know how any of this stuff works. And ultimately, we're all at their mercy, right? So there's that. But then he gets into, in paragraph 110, there's this whole stuff about disarming AI, which I'm really curious to get your thoughts about this because in that paragraph, and then I think in a few other places in here, it seems like he's trying to kind of pick up where, say, for example, John the 23rd left off on issues like nuclear proliferation and maybe some things that John Paul II also wrote about and talked about in terms of the Cold War, where what the Pope is really trying to encourage the world to do is to um, avoid having a situation where AI becomes like a kind of a race to the death between competing powers. And I appreciate that he said that, but at the same time, is that a little naive? Because I mean, like we're told this all the time. Like if we don't go great guns on all the AI stuff, China will, and they're going to annihilate us. And there's no doubt about that. So like I just reading this as an American and as a Catholic, I'm just thinking like I'm not sure what I think about all of that stuff to begin with in terms of like, well, we need to just bet on AI because otherwise China will beat us. I mean, I hate AI, so I hate to think that we're just gonna spend all of our time and energy and resources like focusing on how to be better and better and better at developing it. But at the same time, there does seem to be something like if we don't, then somebody else will, and we're cooked, as my kids would say.
Yeah, no, I agree with them. It just seems to me a little like naive to say, hey, we should really like Anthropic have like a constitution of AI and you know
Right, like a
Anthropic
world
would
protocol. Yeah, like I mean, is that
and
what he's calling for? Like sort of world, like global protocols or like some kind of like I mean, wouldn't it necessitate something like a world government? I mean, I hate to get all conspiratorial
well,
and like,
yeah, I mean,
whatever, but
it kind of sound. I mean, to be honest with you, I kind of like just glanced over that. I went through that stuff pretty quickly, not really thinking too much, but like I had the kind of perception that, oh yeah, 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 yeah. I just don't see somebody like China taking any of this seriously. Um, and I don't see anybody too in the real, I'm sorry to put it this way, but like in seats of power, really
right,
taking that seriously. I do think the logic of, hey, if we don't beat them, they will. Uh,
right.
and anyways, that's I feel like it's hard. This is
Well,
a
I mean, that was the
podcast on
logic of the
hope.
Cold War too, though, right? I mean, that was, and I
Exactly.
suppose like there are people who feel really vindicated by that,
Well,
who feel like, look, we did what we had to do, and we would do it again if we had to. And thank God, we didn't have,
but then you had the
we,
cooling in the 70s, right? And you think like all these, but then
yeah.
and along comes Reagan and we just kind of amped it up again. And
Yeah, I mean that's
um
such an interesting question, and we've talked about that before. But like, this is something I used to talk about with my father a little bit. Like, you know, people forget that when Reagan came along, there really was this general consensus that okay, there's always going to be a Soviet Union, there's always going to be a sort of communist world and a so-called free
exactly.
world,
Yeah.
capitalist world, and what we have to do now is just sort of figure out how we can sort of grow closer together and cooperate and kind of maybe we can just take the temperature down everywhere and kind of let everybody do their own thing and that kind of thing. And Reagan came along and said, no way. And then at the same time, we had John Paul II, who comes from this very interesting background of, ministering all these years under communism and certainly isn't advocating for a buildup of nuclear arms, but does become something of an icon of the kind of conservative Western capitalist, kind of world, even though, as we've discussed before, that would be caricaturing his actual thought by
Yeah,
by
yeah.
a long way. And unfortunately, we know pretty influential people who sort of like to do that with JP too. But anyway, I'm rambling now. But it is an interesting parallel that Leo does seem to draw our attention to a little bit, and I don't know what to make of that. I admit, I really don't.
Yeah, I don't know. I reading this, I was thinking constantly, what would like somebody like an Alex Karp. I don't know if our viewers know who he is. He's got this wild, crazy hair and he kind of interesting CEO of Palantir, whatever they do. What would he make of reading this, since it's maybe not just addressed to um, the faithful. But I just, in all honesty, I didn't feel like anybody was going to take this stuff kind of seriously. I felt like partially Anthropic being part of this was kind of like self-congratulatory. We have like a moral voice, and these
Yeah,
other
can you say
jerks.
anything about Anthropic? I don't follow the kind of
I
AI
I
world.
really I can't, other than just watching what's the name of the CEO who is in all
Yeah, I
these
don't even know.
interviews now, and kind of the their rumble with the Pentagon recently. I really don't know much about all of these groups, but it just seems to me that like they're trying to kind of come across as the moral voice in this age of AI. Um, and you know, in contrast to some of the others who maybe have a very almost realpolitik like vision of the world. And I just think that like you know, I mean, gosh, maybe this is just like confirmation of like how decrepit my real my like almost like if I want to say like what I think is really real sometimes, which I'm oftentimes like always wondering if that's my default position, but is the kind of like real politic vision of and also this like if they don't get there, I don't know if we don't get there first, they will.
Right.
And everything being this kind of struggle for power, um, all the kind of moral language and regulation stuff is is really just kind of a facade for, I'll set the rule. You mentioned this, I think, Andrew, before when I mentioned, well, Anthropic was at the press conference and maybe they had a hand in this that maybe the regulation stuff is also well we'll be writing up the laws and the
Right.
rules.
I mean, the big corporations, I mean, even before kind of the tech boom, but definitely in the age of Google and Microsoft and Facebook and all that stuff. I mean, they want to be in the forefront of kind of these conversations about what's good and not good and all these kinds of
Yeah.
things because they're ultimately gonna set the agenda. Like they're gonna get to be the ones who benefit from whatever regulations come along.
Yeah, and I just don't trust any of these guys coming out of Silicon Valley.
Absolutely
Sorry.
not. No.
I read something this morning by Thomas Hibbs on I had a actually I'll bring this up. So I one of my I don't know why. I know you probably don't like this movie. And I think Christopher Nolan, actually, the more I see him being interviewed about this Odyssey stuff, I can't stand how he's become this like deified director god now. And I go back and rewatched some Oppenheimer. I'm like, this is really like really not that good. I mean, what is all the hype about? I mean, I think he's got some good things. Okay, but what I'm trying to say is I still like just because of the like some of the Platonic themes and like some allusions to the Republic, I was like Batman, the Dark Knight trilogy. And so
Yeah.
what I wanted to do with some of my students was to look at Batman Begins and some of the questions and top. We had to go over something on justice. And so, anyways, but I came across some. I remember Thomas Hibbs. Uh, he has some really good. We should have him on the podcast actually,
Yeah.
to talk about some movies. He had some really good essays on Batman Begins and all that. He had the great. I remember when I wrote something up on the Big Lebowski. Tom Hibbs, I thought had one of the best insights into that movie. But I saw that he had something on around the time I was looking for his stuff on The Dark Knight, which I didn't find. I saw he had an article on The Social Network, and so that's the movie about about Facebook,
Yeah,
and
I love that movie. I made a video about it for Word on Fire,
yeah,
remember?
yeah. So I was
Yeah.
reading his article, and he was just talking though about the kind of the character of these people. Like he says, it's more about like the yeah, like who these it's not so much about like Facebook and the story of the creation of
Hmm.
Facebook, but actually kind of how deplorable these people
Oh
are
yeah.
who are like saying, well, I used to be your only friend. But then you
Yeah.
see that friendship really wasn't there to begin with. I mean, they're all litigating everything against each other. Everything is about litigation.
Yeah, and even before that, I mean the kind of the dark theme of the social network, and it's so great. It's directed by David Fincher and has that classic kind of like dark David Fincher feel to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it basically all boils down to a really, really smart person was angry and jealous and hurt, and his genius sort of was applied to wanting to spite a girl who rejected him. Like that's
Yeah.
the story of the great revolution in human communication is some smart guy was pissed off at a girl who didn't want to be his girlfriend anymore.
Yeah. And,
Period.
yeah,
Right?
but the culture that's kind of being like, he flourishes out in Silicon
Oh
Valley
yeah,
there.
because they're all the
But
same. Because they don't
yeah,
have some like they're not asking these deep questions about what they're doing. They're just doing? I mean, and if you've seen that HBO show Silicon Valley, it comes through in that show really brilliantly as well. That's
Yeah.
such a really great show about technology. Anyway, go ahead. I
Well,
interrupted.
no, I'm just thinking too about these like the kind of more the characters, the people who are we make the tool. They're in some way the interesting thing now is that, I mean, they're designing the tool in such a way that then we all are in some way shaped in that image. I mean, and we
Yeah.
we end up then all becoming just like that. And
Yeah, I don't
so
want to be Mark Zuckerberg I don't want to be those guys, but it's like I can't escape.
yeah, no,
So
no.
hard.
Hopefully, there's things like remember like the talk about having the metaverse, that and
Oh, that kind of fell away, didn't it?
that
Yeah.
did, yeah. So I think there's something where it's like, wait a minute here.
I
Um,
suspect though something like that will come back. I always share the story of like when I was a kid and laser discs came along. And then laser discs kind of failed, like they didn't take off. And then I remember consciously thinking to myself in my mind, "Oh, okay, well we're just sticking with the VHS tapes then. That's it." I mean, they tried something else and no, it didn't work, so we're sticking with the tapes, which is ludicrous. I mean, of course we weren't going to stick with the tapes. It's just a question of like the next way someone tries to do whatever, whatever it is, like it will probably work. But
yeah, that's
anyway,
interesting. I mean, you wonder though how much though, like like Hamby says, no matter Michael Hamby, you could try to suppress the weeds growing through, but eventually,
yeah.
it will grow. And there's
Yeah.
like, it's just the nature of it that
Yeah.
no matter how much they try to be pressed into some shape and form, our just nature will resist it.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
think,
and I mean that's where you kind of have a kind of flesh and bone kind of added to the spirit of the age, right?
yeah,
Because it isn't just like a kind of idea that infects us, but I mean it is like you say, it is this formal, it's formal. And I mean, this gets into, even this sort of like I have a little bit of this actually in my novel, Love in the Fall, available now at
yeah, yeah. Let's talk about that a little
andrewpetiprin.substack.com.
bit. Yeah,
No, but like there's the idea. Well, I'll leave that. I'll leave that for the novel because we're running out of time, and so I think we've named the formal stuff nicely. But I wonder, unless there's something else you want to talk about, if we could end on sort of talking about Christian humanism a little bit,
yeah, yeah.
which the
He
Pope
explicitly mentions that.
yeah, the best paragraphs are 127, 128, and 129. I think for my money, those were the most
Yeah.
refreshing. Those are the most refreshing paragraphs of the whole document for me. I was so glad that he talked about that stuff. Go ahead.
No, no, no. I'm just looking back here because I'm like, okay, where's my copy of anything by Henri de Lubac? I saw John Milbank was tweeting all these things out about those
Oh, really?
paragraphs. He's like, obviously this is almost papal, authoritative papal statement on the nature grace
Yeah, yeah.
issue in Christian anthropology and.
Well, I think let's talk about that because I mean, I do think that that is a very cool move that I don't think, if this document is designed for kind of the people of the world to read. I mean, how
Mhm.
many of them, if you say, hey, let's talk about transhumanism, right? The idea that they would mostly pick up would be to say, "Oh, cool, yeah, transhumanism. That means like we can, replace all of our body parts. We can maybe eventually like upload our consciousness to the cloud or whatever." And the Pope's like, "No, no, 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 no. I want to talk to you about nature and grace. I want to talk to you about how you can become even more human than you are by God's grace."
Yeah.
I mean, that is something that I don't think anyone else in the world, other than, other than Catholics and here obviously like the kind of supreme Catholic, the Pope, could talk about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that just
Yeah.
that language doesn't exist in people's minds, and I think it's significant that it doesn't. Like, of course they're looking for something else because they don't have this. They don't have nature. They don't have this understanding of grace.
Yeah. I mean, he keeps talking about this longing for this fullness, right?
Yeah.
This kind of Augustine thing, this restlessness that Augustine gets at. And transhumanism is precisely an expression of that. But like, yeah, I love it that he quotes Aquinas of all things, because Aquinas, a
Yeah.
lot of people are like, well,
Yeah.
Aquinas says this here that confirms, a certain view of the nature-grace relationship, and then other people quote another thing in Aquinas. So the quote from Aquinas is this that this process of elevation and transformation surpasses every capability of created nature, for an infinite disparity separates our finite nature from the life of God. Okay, yes. Nevertheless, it remains possible, and I'm quoting from the encyclical. Nevertheless, it remains possible to enter into the heart of the inexhaustible life, even as we journey through the limitations of the world. Da 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 da. And then everything old has passed away. We see everything has become new. Okay, quoting Second Corinthians. Um,
Yeah, I think that
so
Second Corinthians quote is really important.
yeah,
Right?
I'm trying to find. I can't exactly find it where this kind of the Christian humanism of it, where we become more ourselves. We don't become less human by God's grace, but more.
Well, he quotes Pope Francis. Well, he does so many times in this
Yeah.
document, and I was glad to see that. I mean, I think that Laudato Si is a document that needs still a lot of reception. I mean, I think that it was a really significant document. I still believe that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he quotes Pope Francis, we become fully human when we become more than human, when we let God bring us beyond ourselves in order to attain the fullest truth of our being.
Hmm.
Um, and that truth of our being thing is interesting. There's a place elsewhere in the document where Pope Leo says something about how truth is not content with usefulness or efficiency. You
Hmm.
know? So like if what transhumanism about is just like, oh, you know, my joints don't work efficiently anymore, so I need to replace them all so I can live better. He'd
Yeah.
say, are you really living better? I mean, yes, in some like basic material way, maybe, but like in the deepest way, no. And that I think hangs over the whole document, and we should point to this that like, okay, world, you've got a narrative of progress and AI and all this tech stuff fits so, I mean, it is the driving part of that narrative. Fine. But what we want to say is whether we agree among ourselves even about whether this stuff should exist or not, we'll have that conversation behind closed doors. But out here in the world, what we want to say is we're at least going to try and make the case to you that the only driving engine for any kind of real human progress is the grace of God. And
Yeah.
I think if that is what comes through in this document, if we dig into it a little bit, then I think it's a huge success, and it's something that gives me hope and encouragement.
Yeah, and when he talks about the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, I
Yeah.
I was kind of it's interesting. I mean, maybe you know more about the walls of Jerusalem than I do, but I always was thinking, well, okay, well, it's a defensive walls maybe, but ultimately the language is just rebuilding Jerusalem is anticipation of the New Jerusalem, the bride of the Lamb. And he gets into this, and you think too, because he then ends with kind of Christian anthropology as finding its best expression in this the receptivity of Mary, the relationship
Yeah.
of Mary to the Word. And you think, okay, well, heck, the new daughter of Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem, in a way, that in a way is the greatest expression of our creatureliness, of our humanity. Um, okay, obviously this is a Christocentric anthropology, but yet Mary in on our, none of us are divine person, okay, but like
Right.
Mary in a way in the formal quality of how the Son of God takes on flesh through her.
Yeah,
Is
look, that's such
model.
a yeah, that's such a great place to end. We didn't flag at the beginning something that is significant, which is that in the first paragraph he quotes Gaudium et Spes 22, which
Yeah.
is that kind of that fundamental expression of human identity in Christ, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
Christocentric anthropology with John Paul II quotes more than I think like every single encyclical I think John Paul II quotes it or yeah, it's all over the place in JP too.
Right. So important that that is noted. But I think equally important that it lands on Mary. who
Yeah.
was I mean, you've already made the point, but I mean, I think Mary is such a great instantiation of this choice for the city, the rebuilding of Jerusalem versus the Tower of Babel, right? It is just this receptivity, cooperation. It is being useful to God and therefore being more human than human in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yes.
And man, if anybody like closes the book on this document and thinks that, then that makes me feel really good. I don't know. I mean, that makes my faith strengthen and just I don't know, leaves me in a better place.
Well, I just want to point out to you that this is called Space Salvi,
Yeah.
after Space, and John and Ratzinger ends in the same Marian key, in that equating, talking about Mary, the star of the sea, with hope. Um, and there's a church not that far from me, called Kalvaria Zebedowska, and it's where John Paul II told people to pray for him after when he came to Poland first. He said, "I like discern my vocation here. I came here with my father all the time." And the basilica's name is actually it's Mary, and it's a celebration of Mary of the I think of the Assumption. And whenever I'm there, because you see this progress of the life of Mary ultimately being crowned, okay, in heavenly glory. Um, um, but in some ways, the way the artist Tetmeyer does it is it's really Tetmeyer's great. The way he does it is like all of creation in some ways is being crowned as well through her. And
Hmm.
I just whenever I go there, I have hope. And I'm just like, if these people who are in some way, all of us who in a way are implicitly shaped in this and educated implicitly in this vision of ultimately sometimes kind of like a transhumanist, post-humanist vision, if they could come here and see this Christian humanism like
Hmm.
that would actually that would be transformative for them and go out and plant seeds of hope that yes that is the true fullness that you're longing for, that none of these
Yeah.
technological devices, if they're just that, are going to deliver.
Yeah. Beautifully said. And I'm glad that we can end exactly there because for all that you and I find it super interesting to kind of think through the philosophy here, and also like for all that it troubles us to kind of see the way the kind of, you know, um, the way humanity is being refashioned by AI and by technology, it remains true, and Pope Leo alludes to this in the document, that it is still possible to just be with people, to have authentic human connection, to be connected to our heritage and to the past, to focus on the things that have produced the world that we live in today for that are good. And that's precisely what we've been ramping up to do at the Space Salvi Institute for a long time. There have been, all kinds of reasons why we're sort of just getting around to some of the key things that we set out to do, but
It's
like
seriously gonna happen.
it's
It
seriously going to happen.
absolutely has
Trips,
to.
in-person encounters, conferences, um, you know, interactive, immersive experiences
Being
on the
physically in
ground.
front of the actual physical object,
Yeah.
that we're
So stay tuned for
contemplating.
all of that. Stay tuned for all of that. And in the meantime, visit our website, spacesalviinstitute.com. We've got a donate button there. A few just incredibly precious people have already clicked that button in the hope of what is to come through the work that we want to do at the Space Salvi Institute. So we'd love for you to just go ahead and click that and support what we're doing and trust us and trust us. We don't take your trust lightly. We know that it's sacred. So I don't know, unless you've got anything else, Bobby, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for listening and watching. If you aren't subscribed, please do go ahead and subscribe. We'd love for you to leave a comment, ask a question, engage with us in the chat box there at YouTube. If you find us in some other format, please let us know where you are. Again, visit our website, spacesalviinstitute.com. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I have a new novel out called Love in the Fall. It's available via my Substack. I'm releasing one chapter a week that you can read, or a podcast version that I am reading myself with my own human voice. And you can get that through andrewpetiprin.substack.com, or you can go right to Apple Podcasts, or what's the other one called? Spotify. And you can search up Love in the Fall, a novel, and you can find me there. But for now, God bless you all and live in hope.